think the good news is that we are doing a very aggressive job of recruiting candidates all across the state.
Democratic Visions is handmade by volunteers for the entire metro region by DFL Senate District 42.
Welcome. One of our favorite guests is back with us on Democratic Visions. Representative Pauul Thissen is in the middle of his 5th term. Pauul represents District 63A, which is Richfield and part of South Minneapolis. Stepping back, Pauul was one of the most impressive in the field of candidates who were running for governor in 2010. But now Pauul has an even more challenging job. Pauul is serving as minority leader of the DFL in the state legislature. Pauul, welcome to Democratic Visions.
Thank you.
So minority leader, tell me what that means.
Well, that means that I am the leader of the Democrats in the State House. Really is 2 jobs. One is to be the spokesman for the Democrats, generally speaking, and the other is to work hard to try to win the majority back in 2012.
Well, now you've spent half your time over there in the minority and half the time in the majority. Yeah. I suspect it's a lot better being in the majority.
I'd much rather be in the majority, and I think it's better for Minnesota as well when the Democrats are in the majority.
What we need, of course, is good candidates out in the southwest suburbs. We got redistricting. Is that proving to be an obstacle in getting good candidates to commit to running?
Well, you know, it is a challenge somewhat because people don't know where the lines are going to be. I think the good news is that we are doing a very aggressive job of recruiting candidates all across the state. Clearly the suburbs and this area of the suburban metro area is going to be a key place for us to win, to take back the majority. Representative Erin Murphy from St. Paul is heading up our efforts with that. In that regard, she's traveling all over the state, meeting with potential candidates. And statewide, we have about 18 seats that we think are our best opportunities to pick up and win in 2012. We've already got candidates up and running, raising money, going out and meeting people, officially filed in 10 of those seats. Redistricting will cause a little bit of confusion as to where the lines exactly will be and where candidates will be running. But right now, that's not holding a lot of people back.
So is there going to be another Republican plan similar to the one that was vetoed by Governor Dayton to redistrict the state?
As we speak, in October, there's going to be the court hearings that are going to set the lines. I think it's going to be a court-drawn map that will come out about mid-February. The Republicans have submitted their map, as you suggested. We will also be submitting a map.
But I do have one question to ask you, Pauul. What does the House offer to a prospective candidate who's thinking about running for the legislature?
Well, the House caucus, I think the things that we offer, we're actually doing quite a bit of training, quite a bit of education for folks. We have a training session coming up October 29th. If people are interested, they should get in touch with us. We provide, in targeted races, financial resources. We provide field workers, and we provide some other, ad support. And for people that are not necessarily in our closest races, we're also going to be providing significant support to them, both informational and some staff support over at DFL headquarters. So we're going to try to work very hard. But one thing that's also really important for us is that the caucus isn't the only ones doing the heavy lifting. It's going to be important that candidates are out knocking on doors and raising money of their own. And it's going to be important that the people around them, the community that wants to support them and see them elected, are also really getting engaged. It's going to take everybody to win the majority. I think the field, the plate is laid really well for us. We have a strong landscape to take back the majority, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of, kind of finger grease, if you will, dialing on the phones and getting people out to vote.
How many House seats have to go Democrat to regain control?
So we are 6 seats out of the majority. We lost those 6 seats by under 700 votes statewide, a total of that. And the other interesting thing, and this area is one of those circumstances, there's 15 Republicans currently sitting in districts that both President Obama and Amy Klobuchar won in their last elections. We think those are ripe for taking back to the Democratic Party. We think that our message is the right one that's resonating with people. And I also think these Republicans who are there now took so many really awful votes that don't represent their constituents, that we're going to have a lot of things to contrast with and make the case to the people of Minnesota. They weren't able to govern. They weren't able to lead our state into a prosperous future. Democrats can.
Pauul, when you ran for governor, you were focusing on 3 issues: healthcare, renewable energy, and education. I want to go to education. We can touch on those others later. Sure. If you want to. Right now, we have a funding crisis in education, and in a show of what I would call chutzpah, we get Representative Garofalo taking the position that the Republicans in the state legislature have more than adequately funded education. Now, I just want to draw an analogy, and you can tell me if it's imperfect, but I see two people. Let's call them Ms. Republican Senator and Mr. Republican House Representative going out, each with a sledgehammer, to a school bus. And they proceed to take turns whacking at that bus until it's virtually demolished. Then they decide, well, let's put a little bit of air in the tires, and they put some air in the tires, and they go and tell everybody that bus is ready to run, and it's in as good a shape as it's ever going to be, and we've done a heck of a job. And besides that, we're not going to let anybody do any repairs to that bus going forward. Am I off the mark when I'm trying to decide what how to look at what's happened with education and the Republicans?
Well, maybe overstates the aggression a little bit, but the point, actually, I think is actually well taken. Because the fact is, education funding, if you adjust for inflation and for the number of students, is down. It's been down over the last decade. It's actually we haven't had a real increase since 1984. What the Republicans are claiming is that this new money that they put in at Governor Dayton's insistence,
$50 a year?
$50 a year, is going to make a big difference. It's not. And we just did a tour around the state to the House caucus, and we talked to a number of superintendents. They were very concerned about the borrowing from the schools that the Republicans did as part of their budget solution.
40% being paid next biennium?
40% being paid the next biennium, which is going to cause borrowing costs. It's going to cause people to take out loans, and it's also setting our state credit rating back, which is not good for us. But the other interesting thing, and this is just one little tidbit, one superintendent says the $50 that was added to education funding is going to be more than taken up just by increased heating costs over the course of the next year. And so, to live in a world that the Republicans are living in is really a world where there is no such thing as inflation, there's no such thing as new students, and there's no such thing as challenges like special education. I think what we need is actually just an honest discussion, and for Pat Garofalo to be going around the state asking local people to disregard what their school districts are saying and really spreading false information about how school districts are flush with money when anybody who's walked into a school in recent, I have kids in the public schools, I go and I know they're doing a great job in our local public school, but they're always strapped for money and they're having to cut programs that really make a difference for people. One last story, and they're raising fees. One mother that testified said that she had to pay $1,000 when school started for her two kids to pay for all the extracurricular fees that they wanted to participate in. That's not good for closing the achievement gap. It's not good for the future of our state, and it's just the Republicans are simply not being honest with Minnesotans.
Approximately a third of the school districts in the state are holding referendums this fall. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right, yes.
And as I understand it, at least 90% of those are for operating levies, which is like books, heat, I suspect, and things like that. It's not to go out and build a new building. Isn't that correct?
Right. No, that's absolutely right. And many of them are actually just to renew things that are
which is no tax increase at all.
Which is no tax increase at all. And so I think that there's really a big effort. I think, fundamentally, I think the Republicans are very scared politically of what they did in this last budget, which was to raise property taxes all across the state. And they don't want school districts raising more property taxes, even though it's the Republicans' responsibility for putting the school districts in that situation to begin with.
Well, it's the consequence of what they did and didn't do. Isn't that correct?
This last year, and honestly, with Governor Plenty over the last decade, yes.
Well, there's another major tax shift that I want to talk to you about, and that one's been hitting the newspapers, and that's the elimination of the homestead tax credit. Tell me what went on there and how it came to be a break that homeowners used to get on their property taxes is no longer present.
Well, I think that this issue really frames up a very significant issue, which is, or discussion that we need to have, which is taxes are going up in this state regardless. It's just, are they fair? What happened with the homestead credit, and that really is the state saying, we're going to reduce your property taxes directly. It has nothing to do with local government decisions. It says, we're going to offer people across the state some relief from property taxes. The Republicans took that. It shows up on your property tax statement. They said, we're going to take that away because we need to balance our budget. They saved $360 million as a result. The fact that they actually saved that money tells you that when they go around saying, oh, it's not really going to affect anybody's taxes, is false, because that money has to come from somewhere. So really, basically what the Republicans decided to do is they made a choice. Instead of asking, big corporations to close some corporate loopholes, things that I think most Minnesotans would agree make sense, instead of asking the richest Minnesotans to pay their fair share in taxes, to pay the same as hardworking middle-class Minnesotans, they said, instead of doing that, we're going to raise property taxes on everybody. Quite honestly, I don't think most of their members really knew what they were voting for when they voted for that, because it really fundamentally undermines kind of one of the things that's important in Minnesota, which is making sure that people who are living in their homes, senior citizens, farmers in parts of the state, that they're going to be able to stay in their homes and not be driven out by high property taxes. It's a commitment we've made in Minnesota for a long time.
Paul, tell me something about what's going on with the constitutional amendments that are coming up. Now, as I understand it, the one has already been set for the ballot in November of next year, which is what I call an anti-human rights amendment to infringe on the rights of gays. Are there other constitutional amendments that are already adopted by the Republican legislature, which of course bypass the governor completely, or do you see others coming down the track?
Unfortunately, that constitutional amendment was passed on the last day of session, the so-called marriage amendment. There's two that I anticipate for sure will be coming because the Republican leadership has essentially promised their most radical right-wing members that they need them, that they'd pass it. One is a requirement that no tax bill can pass without 60% approval in the legislature, which will really, I mean, it may sound good on the surface, but
it's
really will.
It's crippling California right now, is it not?
The experience that other states, other places have had, most states actually that has passed it have repealed it after a while because it really cripples your ability to respond to emergencies, as an example. That one is probably going to be on the ballot. And the second thing that they've clearly said they want to bypass the governor on is this photo ID, the voter ID, that they'll try to put on as a constitutional amendment as well. Are there going to be more? Are there going to be anti-worker amendments? Possibly.
Do you think that having those three amendments is going to be helpful or harmful to the Republican interest going forward into the November elections?
My assessment is that the marriage amendment, as an example, was a significant overreach by the Republicans. I think it's going to come back to haunt them.
The state fair poll, as unscientific as it might be, shows us that, I guess.
I mean, 66% opposed it, 33% in favor of it. I mean, and the polling has moved in that way. It's going to be a very difficult fight, and again, a lot of bad political rhetoric around it. But I think the two things that in the suburbs, I just don't think people believe that we should be putting discrimination in the Constitution. I think in areas like this, it's going to redound against the Republicans. I also think it's going to turn out the youth vote in significant margins. And in some of the races that we really need to win in the House to take back the majority, in St. Cloud and in Northfield, in a number of cities around the state, I think this is one thing that really is going to energize people. Because if you talk to people on college campuses, Republican or Democrat, they don't get this one at all.
So let me bring back something that's probably you're trying to erase from your memory, but that's the shutdown that took place earlier this year. What role, if any, did the Democrats have in trying to resolve that shutdown?
We worked with Governor Dayton all through June to try to come up with a solution. As if you remember, Governor Dayton and Senator Bach and myself, we put out 7 different proposals to try to resolve it in any number of combinations of things to do a balanced approach, which is what the majority of Minnesotans, 60+% of Minnesotans wants. They don't want just a all cuts approach. They don't want an all taxes approach. They want one that balances those two things. That's kind of how Minnesota succeeded. The Republicans said no every single time. And maybe the most frustrating thing was the fact that the Republicans during that whole period of time didn't offer one single solution about how to resolve the budget deficit. They didn't offer one single new idea. So we worked very hard to get there. I think at the end of the day, Governor Dayton looked around and said, the shutdown is bad for the state of Minnesota. The Republicans will sit here and basically let the state kind of wither and crumble before they'd ever vote for any kind of tax increase. I think the people of Minnesota support a balanced approach, but the people that are sitting in the legislature right now won't. Kurt Zeller said to me in these meetings, you could have enough votes. You could get 6, 8, 10 Republicans to vote with you on a tax increase. I will never let that bill come to the floor. That's the kind of intransigence that I think is incredibly frustrating and should frustrate every Minnesotan.
Again, put on that political hat. How do you think that's going to play in Minnesota in the next election?
I think it's already playing poorly for them. I think the fact that they shut down government, took it to its longest shutdown in state history, is certainly something that we will make an issue of it, because what it goes to is not just the shutdown itself, but really an inability to govern and a refusal to listen to the people of Minnesota. It shows their ideological stripes that's really driving them. When the Republicans talk about reform, what they're talking about is cutting government. When Democrats talk about reform, we're talking about improving government, improving the services that people rely on, and we need to do that all the time. We're not against reform, but when what the Republican Reform 2.0 is going to be is that constitutional amendment requiring a 60% vote to raise taxes, and it's going to be about eliminating functions of government in a kind of very harsh and blunt way, instead of trying to improve on the things that actually make this state work. I mean, people in Minnesota expected state government to work effectively, but they expect it to work. Republicans don't want it to work.
Paul, I got an idea that after the November election, you're going to be Speaker of the House. Welcome, and thanks for coming here.
Thank you for saying that.
Democratic Visions is handmade by volunteers for DFL Senate District 42, Lori Pryor, Chair. Democratic Visions can also be seen on YouTube and at dflsd42.org.
Just an aside, always remember one thing. I don't care what it is, just try to remember one thing.